Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dancing into Brain Health podcast. I am your host, Magda Kaczmarska. 10 months ago, we launched the Dancing into Brain Health podcast out of a desire to hold space for conversations that expand our understanding of the role of dance in sparking brain health. We've covered topics ranging from connection of dance and speech and language, embodiment, social connection, and the perception of beauty. We've spoken with world-renowned researchers, clinicians, artists, and lived experience experts. And through all of these conversations, we've found ourselves building new bridges between neuroscience, community practice, and the arts. Today, we're connecting for a special episode of reflection of this inaugural season and considering what were the highlights, what really resonated with us, what stood out, what will we take away, and what questions remain for future conversations. My guests today are Szewah Chin and Hilary Brown-Istrefi, and I'm really excited for our conversation.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, I'm really excited too.
Wonder if we could start by just briefly introducing yourselves. What's perhaps novel and might be interesting for the audience is that we all have a strong connection through our organization, DanceStream Projects. So maybe we can start with that.
My name is Hilary Brown-Istrefi, and I'm actually a teaching artist with DanceStream. Magda and I have been collaborators in different artistic dance-based projects for a really long time, and I've been working with DanceStream for almost 3 years now. I think we're about that marking point. I'm also a director and choreographer and a curator, and I have my own performance collective called Same as Sister. And that's a binational performance collective that I founded and direct with my twin sister, Brianna Brown-Tipley, and we're based in both New York City and Toronto, Canada.
And you might all know Hilary from behind the scenes because she is actually the editor for this podcast.
Yes, it's very exciting to be on the other side now.
So I'm Szewah Chin, and I've been kind of involved with Magda since I met her through some mutual friends. This was quite a few years ago now, and we started a conversation because my mother had dementia, and I sort of knew what Magda was doing, but it wasn't very clear to me. When you're involved in your own life, you know there's something on the periphery of it, but you don't clearly look at it. And so recently, in the last year or so, the focus has been pulled sharper, and Magda and I have been having more conversations about the role of dance in brain health. And I've had the opportunity to actually watch Magda in action. And so this is how I've been pulled into the DanceStream orbit. But I am also a former journalist, and I co-host a podcast with my former CNN colleague, Karuna Shinshode, and it's a podcast called Asians in Arts. So there's many ways that Magda's world and my world and Hilary worlds kind of come together.
And just as another aside, Szewah is also serving as our first board chair for DanceStream Projects as we step into a new chapter of our work.
Yeah, super exciting. Super
So
exciting.
it's a real privilege to be in conversation with both of you. And, it is actually very, I think, serendipitous in a way. I think this season, we're recording this in mid-December in the Northern Hemisphere. And we actually, in New York City, we've just had our first snow. I've been reflecting on the fact that this is a time for looking back, thinking forward. So it feels appropriate to gather and to reflect on this first season.
The fireplace of sorts.
No fire except for the fires in our hearts.
Podcast mics instead.
So we've had quite a lot of guests this season, as I mentioned, ranging from neuroscientists, researchers who are very almost molecular, and individuals who are studying more kind of translational work, thinking about the implications of the arts or various lifestyle approaches on our brain health trajectories, but also artists and people who do research in their own lives, even though they may not always use that language, and also individuals who are living with neurodegenerative conditions who have inspired us to think maybe beyond just that label and thinking more about the holistic experience of an individual beyond labels. So I'm wondering, should we maybe start with what was the one spark as you're sitting here right now? What's the primary thing that's bubbling up to the surface of takeaways from this first season?
I think for me, there were three things for me about this season of the interviewees that you had. One was Mark Timmons, he's has dementia, but it was the way he talked about how that has given him the ability to truly understand himself, of knowing himself, of being aware of the moment, of being in the presence. And the reason why it's stuck with me was because I'm not a Buddhist, but I was exposed to Buddhism very early in my 20s. And the one thing that stayed with me about that experience was basically you have to live in the moment, have to be present, you have to be aware, you have to know yourself. And I've always struggled with, what does it mean to be in the present? Sure, I can do meditation, but what does it mean? What does it mean to know yourself? And lately, my sister, who's a brilliant coach, she said her thing is that you have to know yourself in order to function, whether in a corporate space or whether outside in your personal life. So then when I heard Mark Timmons about he's trying to be more present in his life, that really hit home. It is about really knowing yourself as in what you like and what that means in your daily actions. And just in art as well, you have to be in the present.
Oh, yeah.
You operate in the present. So that's one thing. The next thing was Edward Vessel, and when he was talking about neuroaesthetics, what does beauty mean? You think things are beautiful. Yeah, that's a beautiful guy, that's a beautiful woman. But it was when I was reading the poetry of Keats, who talks about beauty is truth and truth beauty, that I started thinking about it a bit more heavily. And what I liked is that it's always been a very vague idea what beauty is to me. But when I heard Dr. Vessel talking about what makes up what people perceive as beauty, what is your brain doing as you're perceiving what you think is beauty, I found that to be fascinating. And then finally, how Dr. Blumen was talking about movement and aging. Again, it's all because it's very personal. My father is 84 this year, and he is so fit. He goes walking every day for 4 miles. He's been fit his whole life. He started running when he was young. He plays squash. He was in movies, and he still is in films. But
A little bit understatement.
despite the aging, despite the arthritis, despite everything, he remains active. He's now a widower, but he remains active. He has a new partner. He goes exercising. It's not even exercise to him. He knows it's an extension of what he has to do in order to stay healthy and to enjoy life. So I think those 3 interviews really stood out in terms of its relevance to me.
Yeah.
What about you, Hilary?
I definitely agree with everything you said. In the editing process, it's really nice to be able to listen to found moments. This is more of a broad strokes reflection, I guess. But something that really touched me was how each guest's personal relationship to dementia or native aging or even their personal or artistic creative practices really fueled their work through more of a clinical, medical, scientific research space. So I think sometimes we tend to put things into boxes, that there's not these really interesting intersections that happen. And so, yeah, that's been circulating a lot. Going back to Mark Timmons, one thing that really struck me that he shared during the podcast was this notion of our life being broken up into chapters. And sometimes we almost have this pre-described notion of how a chapter is going to begin and end. But through his journey living with dementia, honoring the beauty of having that pivot and realizing new interests or new talents. Maybe this isn't going the course that you thought it would take, but now you've been brought into this new space, and how do you honor being in the present moment? And this is now where you are.
What did you think, Magda?
Well, I'm struck by your reflections because I have thoughts on your reflections. So may I reflect on your reflections?
Go ahead.
I'm just itching to reflect on your reflections. I am actually kind of obsessed with this concept of the now. When I think about some of the most influential mentors in my life, whether they were teachers or colleagues or people who I think were kind of attracted one another, they kind of walked into my life at really important moments. The lessons that they each shared in their own language were that concept of being in the now, being present in the moment, and creating opportunities and developing skills to find that. I have always struggled with being in the now. I'm a person that's driven by action. I'm quite anxious in nature, and so I've I have to find practices, and I think people when they know me now, now in my own 43, they find that that's perhaps surprising. Although people who know me really well know how much I'm driven by action. I can't sit still. And I think that drive needs to be balanced with something. Otherwise, it does start to wear thin. And I remember really struggling at various points in my life and finding that. And I remember like one of my choreography instructor in graduate school, Doug Nielsen, always said, "Be here now." And whenever I'd ask him, like, "How were their holidays?" He was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm not. They already happened. Now I'm here. I'm here with you." And I always found that a little bit frustrating because I wanted to hear about his vacation. But he was so committed to being here in the moment. But it wasn't really until I actually started working, and I've been working in community-based dance for 20 years. It wasn't until I started working really intentionally and consistently with people living with dementia, various forms of neurodegenerative conditions, that I truly found myself being in the now. I think because people living with dementia are so much in the now, and it's such an incredible gift to receive that. I realized that if I was not present in the space with them, then nothing was going to happen. And being able to let go of what will be, my anticipations, my plans. I'm a big planner. Hilary knows we work together. I come up with these really intricate lesson plans, right?
Which is also amazing.
Which is helpful. Another teacher said, make a plan and then break it. Well, actually, that was also Doug Nielsen, but I've heard that in other words. Plans are helpful, but if they become too rigid, then they actually derail us. And so working with this community especially has helped me really put all of that into practice very authentically. And I can see when I let go of the expectation and the outcome and focus instead on the moment, that magic happens.
Yeah, what you just said, it reminds me of Dr. Cecilia Chan, whose work in Malaysia is so interesting because she's so present for each person that she comes across who is living with dementia, that she's able to see solutions in care.
Mhm. I think that being in the moment makes more sense because every breath is a moment. Like I'm in the moment now. That concept of the word now, every single time I say that also brings me to this group dance improvisation practice that is an undercurrent of everything that I do, not just in actual dance practice, but in social practice and the practice of living life. But it's this concept of kind of flexing the muscle of self and other, and how much in order to do that, you have to begin with an understanding of yourself, which is something that you resonated with, Siwa, and listening to Mark. But you start with understanding yourself and kind of exploring this material of dance within your body as instrument. And then you enter into a relationship with another body. And it's not less about the exchange and more about that we are now a body of two. And so now how do we function and discover what this body can do? And going in and out of that exchange, which if you are not in the now, then you are always anticipating and forcing an outcome. And then it is no longer a dance of a body of two, it's a dance of you forcing your intentions on someone else. And that practice, and is very much a practice, is incredibly satisfying. And I find that working with these communities of folks living with dementia has allowed me to really understand that viscerally. And as a result, it has made me a significantly better person in all of the other communities that where I show up. And so that to me is an incredible gift, and it inspires for me to want to continue doing this work. And it drives, I think, a desire, something that, Mark mentioned. He has found himself stepping into the seat of advocacy, knowing that he has an opportunity to speak and be heard. And maybe not everybody wants to or is in a position to do that. And I see myself as an ally, as somebody who is not living with dementia, with this privilege of being invited into community and then being able to hear and listen and witness, and then to offer the opportunity for showcasing perspectives of that community. Obviously, you can't expect that somebody's going to want to share their perspectives, but to at least be able to say, okay, this is an opportunity that we can work towards. And if you want to, there's a community out there who would benefit from hearing your perspective of how you see your life and what you have learned as an experience, an extension of this experience you're navigating.
But it's really in the physical space that you see the magic happening.
Yes.
Because then I'm thinking about, it's beautiful how you've described it, but when I step into it, it's even more than one expects. Like seeing you both work with the folks that you've worked with, there's something quite, I can't even verbalize it, but you understand it when you see it. So, I suggest to our listeners, Magda's listeners actually, that if you do have the opportunities to go and see Hilary do their work, because it is I can't verbalize it. You have to be there in order to experience it.
I agree. Even as a co-facilitator with Magda, it's definitely in the moment. It's a very felt experience, and to witness it too. So yeah, it has to be in real time.
Our second guest on the podcast, Dr. Adolfo Garcia, who is a dear friend of mine and one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. He also thinks very quickly. And so I'm grateful that he slowed down his thoughts enough to have a conversation with me. But what struck me out of our conversation is resonating a little bit in what you're speaking about right now, is this understanding that our brains are embodied, that all of our communication and language happens with our body. And I think about how much we have become attached to this verbal expression, when in fact all of that actually stems from things that we're feeling and perceiving in our surroundings. And when we go into these spaces in dance, and I say this often, dance is not the only art form that does this, but I do think that because it's embodied, it's a perfect container to allow us to practice and witness this experience.
I do think of late, because when I was growing up, I did go to ballet, I watched performances, and of course it kind of fell by the wayside in my teenage years and early 20s and 30s, because what I had been seeing was very classical, very traditional. Even with, Chinese opera, you see a lot of movement. And then recently, I think it was Karen who took me to see a performance, Alvin Ailey performance, and I just realized it was really physical. And it makes me think, an actor, because I'm interested in the acting space and film space, has to project their presence to an audience all the way up to the second, to the top tiers. And then dancers can equally do that, but without the words. And I'm thinking, how is it that they do that? And so my interest in dancers, through your work as well, has been gathering pace, especially through my friend Jessica Spence, who's been sort of breaking down the myth of who Balanchine is, why the Dutch National Dance Company is so great, and what are they doing which is new. And I'm sort of applying my understanding of theatre and film into this dance space and seeing it's actually a very physical, exciting, expressive, and very accessible to people as well, who perhaps are not professional dancers, which is what you are working with as well.
I have some thoughts, but Hilary, I'm curious.
Like
Knowing that you are more recently in the performance space than I.
I mean, there's so much to unpack there. The performance-based work that I do is very interdisciplinary, even though I come from more of a dance and choreographic background. And I oftentimes struggle with when to interject text as a storytelling tool or in addition to the movement, even though that is very much a part of my work and research, because I do make more narrative-centered pieces. There's something about using the body to express, and there's a universality in that cuts down a lot of barriers. It goes back to what you were saying, Szewah, about having to witness it in real time and have that felt experience. The vocabulary, the language of the body feels so accessible to me, because we may not speak the same language, but if I extend out my hand or smile or lower my gaze, you're going to kind of come into the same space as me. That's been a really powerful tool in a lot of the programs that Magda and I co-facilitate together with communities living with dementia, because I think it levels the playing field. Like, we're all in this space together, and we can all express ourselves in what maybe some people feel are pedestrian or mundane ways, but there's a lot of weight and power in that. And it also, I think, reconfigures people's interpretation of what dance like in quotations, like or big D dances or choreography, just wiggling a finger or a toe can be a score of movement. And that's accessible to a lot of people.
Oh, completely. Yeah, Hilary, I could not have said that better myself. That was such a beautiful representation of what we witness. And so I'm going to get really personal about this, but for me, I've always been fascinated with language and connection. So this is why speaking to somebody brilliant like Dr. Vessel or our recent guest who you all have not heard yet because we just had a conversation, Dr. Anusha Mohan, who studies sensory perception. I'm so struck with their understanding of how our brains and bodies perceive our surroundings and how each of us is unique and how, in a way, we all walk around as individuals, never really being able to understand what goes on in your head, Hilary, and in your head, Siwa, what your experience when we touch the surface of this table. My perception of smooth and cool or warm is going to be different than yours. And on one hand, that can feel incredibly isolating. And on the other hand, it offers kind of an endless opportunity for seeking connection. I think this is where the arts have since the dawn of civilization, we have been striving, I think, to represent the things that move us in ways that allow others to perhaps have this perception of that experience that has moved us so powerfully. But at the same time, and that feels really lofty, whether it's spiritual or high art. But in the quotidian and the everyday, we also experience this. And I know that I definitely received through the experience of dance an opportunity to connect with an element of myself and my personality and my ability to connect with others that I had lacked previously. And it opened up something that I had always wanted and had never been able to succeed at. And that feeling was so transformative for me. I have dedicated my life to striving to discover tools that can allow me to facilitate that for others because I want other people to have that level of satisfaction, of joy, of agency, and opportunity.
So when did you, I mean, that's really knowing yourself. When did that happen? When did the penny drop?
And I remember telling my mom when I was 8 that I want to be a dancer, and that wasn't going to be possible, just because of our unique experience, as immigrants. My mom is a brilliant scientist. She was getting her PhD, and there was no way that we could ever afford to support me to have a professional career, the way that I at that point envisioned it. But at 13, I started performing folk dance, and I remember being on stage a soloist in front of an audience. This is, mind you, somebody who, if I was asked to answer a question in class, I'd turn beet red, sweat bucket, start shaking, and not be able to get a word out. And here I was in front of an entire audience, making eye contact, smiling, and having the time of my life, and feeling this euphoria of connection that I had never experienced in my life. And so I discovered this whole other sense, and I discovered a language that somehow I didn't even know I possessed, and being able to transmute music, which I've always loved, into movement and phrasing and sequencing. Initially, it was for myself and my peers, and then eventually it was with ballet. And then with time, largely because I was introduced to this group dance improvisation work, it's translated into connecting in a more abstract way through movement. We all use our bodies to express. We talk about this in our programs all the time, but we just lack the awareness of it. We just don't look at the fact that we are speaking constantly in an embodied way. And so without that awareness, then we can't be intentional about it. And so just by being able to bring our awareness to the fact that how can we as three individuals, how can we find all the ways that we can say hello and welcome? And already we've scratched the surface of our library of movement vocabulary that we've accumulated. And now how can we unpack that into its component parts, and like the words in a sentence, and the sentence in a paragraph, the paragraph in a book, how can we write our own movement stories. That is immensely satisfying because, as you said, Hilary, it's universal. Of course, we bring our unique experiences, and the more disparate our experiences, the more opportunities for discovery and emergence. But nonetheless, we do have a common kind of horizontal playing field that maybe we lacked previously. I'm really curious by how much most of our society is disembodied, so to speak.
Because there's a lot of emphasis on the individual.
Yeah,
What am I going to do when I grow up? Where is my career taking me? How do I feel in
but
this situation?
but that identity is so cognitive. I used to laugh this observation that we're somehow walking heads, and our bodies are just these inconvenient containers, vessels that carry these precious objects in our minds. So this is why it's so fascinating to talk with these researchers who say, well, actually, yes, there's fascinating things that happen in the brain, but they don't happen in isolation from our bodies and from our surroundings. So what you're mentioning is being able to translate some of those brilliant ideas and perceptions of identity in a way that allows for another person to understand them. And that does require a certain level of listening and nuance and embodiment. Otherwise, yeah, it can become very frustrating when you think that you're expressing yourself in a way that's loving, but another person is perceiving it as something else.
I feel what you are both talking about really brings me back to the guests of the podcast, and through their research, which is more in the neuroscience field, how that kind of allows us to have a greater understanding and awareness of what is going on internally in our systems, and then also how that builds understanding for people around us. And then ultimately, I mean, not that this is a personal goal or a collective goal, but that does promote connectivity.
You know, when we talk about life, it talks about Buddhism in particular. And again, I'm not a Buddhist, but it's just I've been very interested by what they say is to have a body is in a way to suffer. So when you grow up and you're connected to your body in terms of image, but then you feel disconnected to it as well. And I think dance is the science, as you say, these scientists are trying to show you, is that it's very much connected with how you are and how you express yourself and how you experience life.
Uh-huh.
And this is why I really love the series because they're very good storytellers.
Hmm.
Yes.
They're able to say, this is the reason why. And they bring their curiosity and their enthusiasm right to you through this podcast series.
Yeah.
So I think that's what struck me. It's not just the topics they're talking about, but the scientists who have spoken, they're very clear in why it makes them so excited.
Well, they are brilliant. They're brilliant people.
Well curated.
Thank you. Well, in some part, I can thank my colleagues at the Global Brain Health Institute because quite a few of them are in some ways connected. And so I can't take full credit for their brilliance. I was thinking about two things. One is, and this is somebody who I want to invite as our guest for the upcoming season because I hold them in high regard, but there's a researcher called Dr. Emily Cross who is also studies neuroaesthetics and looks at dance and perception of dance and then how much pleasure we elicit from that experience. And I'm summarizing her research from my understanding of it. So hopefully when and if she agrees to join us on the podcast, we can hear it from her brilliant storytelling. But so many of us have heard about mirror neurons, that when somebody else is doing an activity that we're actually replicating that in kind in our own body. But she studies the action perception network, I think. If I'm wrong, that's okay. She can correct me when we speak together. Basically, it's a larger network. It's not just specific to these neurons. It's actually a larger network that supports multiple parts of our brain. And basically, when we are observing a dance performance, we are actually dancing with the people on stage. Now,
Oh, I really love that.
right? Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
And so we have that feeling of lift and excitement and beauty and strain and challenge and difficulty and that excitement. But if we have experienced any of the movement vocabulary that is presented in that performance, we actually have an elevated experience of pleasure. that we derive from witnessing the performance. So the more that you actually tune your own instrument in that embodied practice, your experience of pleasure is heightened. And that makes me think, I wonder sometimes, when people who are really into sports, especially if they had engaged as sports players in their youth, or maybe had even been professional, and then they watch sports. I can imagine that knowing this, when they're experiencing a really great game, that they are actually in that game with their favorite players, which to me, knowing that we are these islands, so to speak, and that we are each unique and never fully experience, that to me feels like the strongest connection that we actually can have, where we physically are feeling what the person that we're witnessing is embodying. That gives me so much hope. And joy that yeah, we're all dancing, even if we're not moving physically.
I read something interesting in trying to find sort of movies which are made about Christmas, because we're still in a season of, I know not everyone celebrates Christmas, but
No.
there was one where Kiefer Sutherland is going, the son of actor Donald Sutherland. He goes to England and does a pantomime performance. So it's a movie about him. But I was reading up about his experience in acting, and he's actually partially hard of hearing. So he needs cues when he's meant to come in and say his lines. But I can just imagine he's so seasoned now that he can take cues from the body of other people, not just cues, not just verbal cues, but he's able to act within that space too. So there has to be something there about being able to take in mirror. Is it mirroring at all? Is it something different?
I think it's so. I have two thoughts about this. Again, I can't really understand the lived experience. I've performed with a woman named Mina Majors, who's a beautiful dancer who has partial, if not full, hearing loss. And when we would dance together, she would remove her hearing aids because she felt that somehow the experience of how the sound and the music was processed would actually confuse her endogenous kind of understanding of the rhythm and and so when we would dance, we would have a few, like, I would watch her. We would kind of come up with some, like, blind to the audience, but we would have some preset cues that we'd have with one another. But mostly she just relied on rhythm. And then I also I just know kind of professionally in the field, he's quite a rock star, Antoine Hunter, who is based in the Bay Area and is a deaf dancer. He has spoken about how he perceives rhythm through the floor, and has actually created shoes that allow other deaf dancers to feel the rhythm so that then they can dance alongside with others. And he's a spectacular performer, massive, brilliant educator and leader in the field. But in kind of reflecting on their experience, I'm thinking back to our first guest, Dr. Konstantina Theophanopoulou, who speaks about rhythm and how we anticipate rhythm, that we are one of the few creatures in the world, aside from parrots, who anticipate rhythm. And then I also think about the fact that my teachers always said that in order to anticipate rhythm, you have to relax. So this understanding of being relaxed and receptive, and then trusting that we naturally anticipate rhythm, and then just letting it happen.
I don't know. I find that really interesting because, I'm a parent now, and watching the human brain develop, which essentially is what childhood is to me anyway, is for me to sit there and wonder, how is it that they know that? My kid has been listening more and more to music, and I'm just saying, how did she know to move like that to this piece of song?
I think that's organic. That's the most, we start to dance in our mother's wombs.
I know mine started to hiccup a lot. So that's a thing, we always joke about it with them. We just say, well, you were hiccuping a lot. So there's movement of some sorts.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we'll sometimes say in class, because people who haven't grown up in dance will say, "Oh, I'm not a dancer." I think it's bizarre that we have examples and we condition ourselves to and encourage ourselves as individuals in our society, at least here or in the US, at any point in our life, if you wish to start to draw or to paint or to write poetry or prose, if you wish to pick up a musical instrument, join a choir, you're encouraged, even sports, you're encouraged energetically. And when it comes to dance, everybody instantly steps away into the shadows and says, oh, no, I am not a dancer. Even professional dancers. And I try very hard because I'll even say like, oh, I'm not really dancing anymore. I'm like, goodness gracious, stop. We're so conditioned to this that dance is relegated to this microscopic subcategory of humans that are not only have trained in a specific time period, a specific time, in a specific way, and are presenting and their movement in a specific format with a specific financial compensation in connection to some organization. And if you don't exist in that tiny microcosm of humanity, you are not a dancer. You do not deserve that title. And I think that is bogus. That is my mission, to stop and break this perception, because by doing that, we're preventing ourselves from connecting with these things that we've been discussing for these last 45 minutes or so. That joy, that appreciation, that opportunity for connection, for discovering and being in the moment, for finding a horizontal engagement with others and building connection and community. And I used to say, well, we should just say that we're movers. And now I'm reclaiming dance. I'm saying, no, we are dancers.
Yes.
We are
And
all dancing.
This is interesting because from when I was growing up as a kid, I watched a lot of Chinese opera, which has a sort of mashup of some acting, facial expressions, movement. And to me, it's always been very, very relevant in our lives because a lot of action movies have come out of Hong Kong and done very, very well. They've been great martial art performers who've made it as film stars. So to me, it's always been, form of movement has always been important. I think where I got stuck was probably the classical ballet. I was like, what does this all mean? Which my friend Jess is helping me unpack in many ways. But I think it's becoming more and more relevant. I mean, I think it is really important to be able to just be with a community of people and saying, you just have to be able to use your body in a very, I don't know, playful, graceful, expressive way, which to me is maybe what dance is.
Doug Nielsen, I keep on. We should just invite him on here.
Yeah.
Doug Nielsen, if you're listening, your ears are probably burning, and I appreciate you. This is one of my grad mentors. He said, "What is a dance? Do something and then do it again."
Oh, it's so nice.
He
The barrier
was so
to
good.
entry is
He
so
was
low.
so
It's
good,
wonderful.
right?
So just to take all the topics that you've done in this season of your podcast, how has it informed both your work within the community for the last year?
I think for me, because I'm very new to this arts and health space, this concept or idea of novelty was really surprising because in my practice, like as a dancer and choreographer, it's really easy to get into a routine and like I'm going to kind of share and teach this routine to my collaborators or participants of programs I'm teaching. But I feel like all the researchers, scientists, doctors that we spoke with mentioned that somehow in their research they introduced this idea of novelty. I've been really thinking about that a lot and how Magda and I design the lesson plans for the different communities we're working with. Because it's easy to be like, this group seems to gravitate towards this kind of movement or material or music, and then kind of just trying to keep that going. But what happens when we insert this new idea? And then it opens up the challenge for them a little more, and that also gives them a sense of agency and, oh, I can do new things, and then just how we can keep building from there. So yeah, that's a nugget that's really stuck with me.
And novelty is, from a pedagogic standpoint, we understand that in order to learn something new, we have to go to build on something. There needs to be a scaffolding. But if there's not enough novelty, then we become bored and lack motivation. And if we introduce too much novelty, then we actually create fear or lack of sense of agency and ownership of the work. So that fine balance of discovering for an individual and for a community what is going to be the novelty that is going to push them into a space of discovery and emergence and satisfaction. And that comes back to what I experienced as a child and what has sparked for me. But knowing that is actually consistently one of the top things that researchers say is necessary for brain health is encouraging because it reinforces what I think I've always known, we've witnessed, and validates the importance of this work. Obviously we talk about almost like the brain and the body as an organ and understanding, the vasculature and being able to support that, and being able to introduce nutrients like oxygen, all of these things, the need for connection. And Dr. Blumen speaks about that very powerfully and how instrumental that is. But I think actually more so than that, it's finding meaning and purpose. And then novelty, I think, are the two most important things. And I think Mark Timmons, again, articulated that excellently, that many of the people that he meets in his work as an advocate who have just recently been diagnosed with dementia have lost a sense of meaning and purpose. And they feel, and I think largely because of the way that we have created narratives around what it means to be living with dementia and what we have perceived and the and this focus on the end as opposed to the possibility of what happens in between that diagnosis and the end of life. Like we are all, I'm sorry to be morbid, but we're all heading towards the end of life at some point. But unless we're diagnosed with a chronic condition, we don't think about that. I think we do people living with dementia a massive disservice by primarily focusing on that and not giving them an opportunity to still have what we all need in order to thrive. That sense of creativity, emergence, novelty, as well as an opportunity to discover new meaning and purpose to continue writing their chapters. So those two things are a reinforcement of something that I think I've always known is important, but now realize is much more important than all of the other things that I had thought were important. I was focusing on the tools and the materials, and instead this is the totality. This is the undercurrent, the root, and everything else grows out of it.
It sounds like it's basically allowing people to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
To remove the labels, to remove the social structures, some of them which have been beneficial. And then I think if a situation changes and it's not within the understanding of that society, then it's to just say it's okay to be yourself, to work through it as a human being rather than having to work with the expectations of what the medical system expects you to do and what your family expects you to do or your friends.
I'm going to ask the same question to you, Szewah. What was the biggest takeaway for you?
I think that there's still so much we don't know, and to respect the fact that this is a field which is growing, and to respect the fact that there are lots of things we don't know. And to be humble about it. How does it apply to my daily life? It's just to keep an open mind. It's funny how this journey with dementia continues after my mum has now passed away. But I think it shows me the value of community, of trying to create understanding, of trying to find meaning as well. Each of the interviewees that you had are sort of painting a fuller picture of what life is, beyond the organs, beyond the sort of medical terms, and trying to do something for, contribute to your field, what you both work in. And it's basically, how do you make this place better for the people who have dementia?
And I
How
would
do you
say
help
for all
them?
of us, I
Yeah.
think, too. Yeah.
And for youngsters to let them know early on how they perhaps should be looking at their health, not just running, not just doing extreme sports or yoga. It's like more is there to life, and to create something which sort of nourishes your life.
One of the things that we always end is for an opportunity to have a personal reflection, at least in this particular moment, of a time that you have either experienced or witnessed the magic of dance in your life. And I feel maybe that might be a good way for us to end. What was something that is a really positive memory for me is of Szewah and my partner and your kid, and I remember we did one of the birthdays, we were doing a dance off together, or like dancing around the kitchen table with Baby Shark. Like, so it's actually outside of the things that we do. Again, understanding how that passing along of an individual movement with other people instantly creates a sense of embodied connection and belonging. And so even though I've had many experiences with dance, right now sitting with you, Szewah, that's one that's percolating for me, and how much joy that brought. I think we did the Baby Shark, and then there was Happy, you know?
Oh, I love, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very danceable song.
Yeah. And we were just passing along. We were doing little signature moves, passing along movements from one to another.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So just again, that sense of connection and belonging that we don't even have to think about. It just happens.
Yeah, as you bring another person into the world, you're dancing with them. Really, my interest was reignited because of my friends and because of New York. Just seeing shows or watching you in your performance piece, your performance art. That movie was made. It was before COVID. I really loved it, and I remember taking my kid to see that as well. We were all there as a family watching. It was so much fun. Did you see it?
I did. I went, I think it was the like opening at the gallery, like there was the screening of it.
Yeah.
It was in New Canal Street.
Oh my God,
that
that's so
gallery.
funny.
Yeah, yes, I remember that.
I loved it too.
I was not expecting that we were going to be reflecting on my performance.
But
yeah,
that's
it's
the
fine.
thing. You never talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful piece.
Well,
okay, we don't have to go into the reasons why.
Well,
you don't.
no, but no, but it was powerful because of the directing of Kevin and Jen McCoy, and
really well edited.
Yeah,
really, and it's very well
there's
directed.
their vision and the cinematography, and Hilary Ramos, who was the choreographic director, who really advised me in kind of relating to the space. I mean, that's a whole other conversation because it was a dance that was relating to space and kind of being invisible in relationship to others, which I think was also really fascinating considering this topic, right? This and the understanding of kind of everyday movement as a source for choreography, which I think appears in all of the work that Hilary and I do in our day to day. Now, thank you for bringing that back. I'm more comfortable holding space for the expression of others than for my own, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
And what about you, Hilary?
This is a hard one for me because I feel like there's so many. I guess in more recent years, what has been really striking or powerful for me is being able to take my expertise and background in dance and choreography into communities or environments that I didn't really envision myself in before. So through some of the project development work that I've been doing with my sister Brianna in Canada, in Toronto, we got to work with a group of like interdisciplinary artists who are living with mental illness. And for many of them, it was their first time activating movement through their storytelling. Of course, the work that I've been doing with Magda over the last 3 years with DanceStream. Yeah, and then more recently, I was casted to be part of a theater production for a physical theater company, and also exploring movement with people that come from more of an acting background. So getting this very rich, eclectic experience of how movement lives in these different places and different bodies has been really, really eye-opening and has changed me as a mover and how I interpret movement too.
And actually, I find that acting is also a facial movement too. It's like movement is so big when it comes to the arts.
Yeah, I've been working with Blessed Unrest, which is a New York City-based physical theater company, and we were working on a production. I mean, it touches on so many of the things that we were talking about too in this episode. Right now, the working title is Body 2.0, and it's bringing in so many different perspectives of body, whether that's anatomical, scientific, artistic, creative, personal. It was really phenomenal to be in a space with people that maybe wouldn't necessarily name themselves as dancers, but when I was working with them on the daily, I was like, you are all dancers. And I felt the same when we were working with the artists in Toronto and with our participants in our programs too. They are all dancers to me. And I know that can sound a little cliche, like everyone can dance, but I truly, truly believe everyone can dance.
You know, one of my colleagues, and also somebody that we should shout out, Mary Fridley, who is one of the co-founders of an initiative called Reimagining Dementia. She came to one of our programs and she reflected that what she observed, and now this is, mind you, somebody who is an expert in improvisation, has spent decades really perfecting this craft of curating collective spaces around performance. And what she said that stood out to her is that we create a space in our programs, in our dance programs, where we anticipate that this person already is a dancer, that they can. So then as a result, people do. And that was such a beautiful reflection. I had never considered that. But how important it is to initially hold that container for somebody. In group dance improvisation, we talk about the creative limitation. I think in our Western society, in our capitalist society, we think about limitation as negative. But in fact, we can use a limitation intentionally to spark more creativity and possibility. And being able to help initially craft that container and space for somebody so that then they can find discovery and that sense of confidence. And then being able to step back and watch them take ownership for it. I mean, that's what we witnessed this year with the folks from the Queen Center for Gay Seniors, 20 elders who performed in front of 400 people at the UNGA Healing Arts Week. I think people were so struck with the fact that they were owning that stage because they were owning that stage. and
they had such a integral role. I mean, they were the creators of the dance.
Yeah.
And they stepped up to it as well because you both got them to a space where they kind of got it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, it was theirs. It was completely theirs. Hilary and I were kind of irrelevant. And that's a beautiful space to be when your role is to facilitate community and agency in dance or any art form. So I think we should wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was a wonderful conversation.
We should do this more often. This is
I
kind
think
of
we
fun.
can. It's like, what have we learned from the last few months or quarter, just to reflect, because I think it's good to sort of plow back in, what you've learned into what you do.
Yeah. Well, listeners, I guess, let us know what you thought, but I certainly enjoyed this. And it is playing with ideas. It is nice to bring them into the embodied experiences. I guess the only thing I will say now is that this episode of Dancing into Brain Health was edited and produced by me, Magda Kaczmarska, Szewah Chin, and Hilary Brown-Istrefi. And the music for this show is the title cut from the album Critical Path by Joe Venegoni and Carl Weingarten. And you can check out our show notes from this episode in our website,